They called him old man, laughed at his accent, left fake tips just to watch him count empty bills. The wealthy customers at Romano's thought the 60-year-old waiter was just another immigrant struggling to make ends meet, until one night, a former government official recognized the way he moved, the way he watched, and realized they'd been mocking a man who once operated in shadows they couldn't imagine. Welcome to Stories of Secret Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity and earned respect, tell me in the comments from which city are you watching this video today. And if you believe everyone deserves dignity regardless of their current job, hit that subscribe button and help us share stories that matter. Romano's Ristorante sat in the heart of the financial district, its crystal chandeliers and mahogany panels attracting the kind of clientele who measured success in stock portfolios and designer watches. The restaurant prided itself on exclusivity. Reservations booked months in advance, wine bottles that cost more than most people's rent, and service that catered to those who expected the world to revolve around their wealth. Among the staff moved a man who seemed out of place among the polished servers and sommeliers. His name was Viktor Kozlov, though most customers never bothered to learn it. At 60, he moved with careful precision, his graying hair always neat despite the demanding shifts, his uniform always pressed even though it had seen better years. He spoke with a faint accent that some customers found amusing, others annoying, but none ever bothered to identify. Victor had worked at Romano's for 3 years, ever since he'd arrived in the city with nothing but the clothes on his back, and a past he never discussed. He was reliable, professional, and invisible in the way that wealthy people preferred their service staff to be. He brought their food, poured their wine, cleared their plates, and endured their treatment with a stoic patience that his co-workers both admired and pitied. Table 12 was the worst. A group of investment bankers who came in twice a week, always requesting Victor's section because they found him entertaining in the cruelest sense. They called him Boris despite his gentle corrections, made jokes about his accent, and treated him like a performing monkey for their amusement.
Hey Boris, Jason Wellington, a hedge fund manager, would call out, snapping his fingers. Tell us again how you say expensive wine in Russian.
Victor would correct politely that he wasn't Russian, that his name was Victor, but they never listened. They were too busy laughing, too entertained by their own perceived superiority to care about accuracy. The fake tips were the worst part. They'd leave what looked like $100 bill watching with amusement as Victor's face would show a moment of gratitude before he realized it was play money with "You've been pranked" printed on the back. They'd record his reaction on their phones, posting it to their social media with captions about teaching the help some humility. Victor never complained. He'd quietly pocket the fake money, clear their table with the same professional courtesy he showed everyone else, and continue his shift. The other servers felt sorry for him, but none of them intervened. Jobs at Romano's were hard to come by, and nobody wanted to risk their position defending someone who seemed to accept his treatment without protest. Dr. Amanda Chen had been coming to Romano's for business dinners for over a year, but she'd never paid much attention to the staff beyond polite interactions. As a former State Department intelligence analyst, she was trained to observe, but restaurants felt like neutral territory where she could let her guard down. That changed the night she was seated at table 15, with a clear view of table 12 and their regular entertainment. Amanda watched with growing discomfort as the group of bankers tormented their waiter. The fake tip routine, the name-calling, the deliberate rudeness, it was painful to witness. But what caught her attention wasn't the cruelty of the customers. It was the way their victim handled it. Victor moved through the abuse with a composure that seemed almost military. His posture remained perfect despite the humiliation. His responses were measured and professional, even when they were mocking his accent. His eyes constantly scanned the room with a precision that had nothing to do with checking on other tables. Amanda had spent 15 years analyzing human behavior in high-stress environments, and something about Victor's demeanor triggered her professional instincts. This wasn't the defeated acceptance of someone used to mistreatment. This was the controlled discipline of someone who could end the situation in seconds, but chose not to. She began watching more carefully. Victor's movements were economical, purposeful, never wasted. When he carried multiple plates, his balance was perfect. When he navigated the crowded dining room, he never bumped into anything or anyone. When he stood, he positioned himself where he could see all exits and had his back protected. Most tellingly, when the banker named Jason got aggressively drunk one evening and grabbed Victor's wrist while making a crude joke, Victor's reaction lasted only a split second, but Amanda saw it. The flash of muscle tension, the slight shift in stance, the way his free hand moved toward Jason's pressure point before stopping. Victor had been about to do something that would have ended Jason's grip instantly, possibly painfully, before choosing restraint instead. That's when Amanda knew she was looking at someone with training. Serious, professional, dangerous training. Amanda couldn't let it go. That night, she used her remaining government contacts to run a discreet background check on Viktor Kozlov. What she found made her blood run cold. The file was heavily redacted, but what remained told an extraordinary story. Viktor Kozlov, former colonel in Soviet Spetsnaz, had defected to the United States in 1991. His CIA recruitment file listed skills in 6 languages, advanced combat training, expertise in infiltration and extraction, and a service record that included some of the most classified operations of the final years of the Cold War. After his defection, Victor had worked for the agency for over 20 years. His assignments took him to places that didn't exist on official maps, conducting operations that would never appear in history books. He'd been one of the CIA's most valuable assets, a man who could disappear into any environment, speak any language convincingly, and accomplish objectives that seemed impossible. The file ended abruptly in 2018 with a medical discharge notation. No details, no explanation, just a date and a classification level that told Amanda this man's service had ended due to circumstances she'd probably never be allowed to know. Viktor Kozlov wasn't a struggling immigrant taking whatever work he could find. He was a decorated intelligence operative who'd spent 30 years serving 2 countries, conducting operations that kept people like Jason Wellington safe to make their money and live their comfortable lives. And they were treating him like a joke. Amanda couldn't stand by and watch anymore. The next time she had dinner at Romano's, she requested Victor's section and waited for the inevitable appearance of Table 12. They arrived like clockwork. Jason, Marcus, David and Tom, 4 bankers in expensive suits ready for their weekly entertainment at Victor's expense. They were already drunk from their pre-dinner cocktails, already laughing about their plans to mess with Boris tonight. Amanda watched Victor serve them with his usual professionalism, saw them start their routine of fake accents and crude jokes. When Jason pulled out another fake $100 bill and made a show of leaving it as a tip, Amanda had seen enough. She stood up and walked over to Table 12. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed during years of briefing senators and cabinet members. "I couldn't help but notice your interaction with your server." Jason looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Yeah, what about it, lady? I was wondering if you knew that the man you've been calling Boris is actually Colonel Viktor Kozlov, former Soviet Spetsnaz, CIA operative for over 20 years, and probably one of the most dangerous men in this room." The table went silent. Marcus laughed nervously. "Come on, lady. That's just Boris. He's a waiter." Amanda pulled out her phone and showed them Victor's official CIA commendation photo. The same face, 20 years younger, in dress uniform with ribbons that represented classified operations. "This waiter has served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Eastern Europe, and places you've never heard of. He speaks 6 languages fluently, has survived situations that would break you mentally, and has saved more lives than you'll ever know." The color drained from Jason's face. "The man you've been humiliating for 3 years could kill everyone at this table with his bare hands in under 30 seconds, Amanda continued, her voice steady but ice cold. "But he doesn't, because he has more honor, more discipline, and more class than all of you combined." She placed a real $100 bill on the table. "This is for Colonel Kozlov, and gentlemen, you might want to find a new restaurant." The next day, Victor was setting up his section when Amanda returned for lunch. She asked to be seated at one of his tables and waited until he approached to take her order. "Colonel Kozlov," she said quietly, "my name is Dr. Amanda Chen. I was a State Department intelligence analyst for 15 years. I believe we need to talk." Victor's expression didn't change, but she saw recognition in his eyes. "I am just a waiter, Dr. Chen. We both know that's not true, and after last night I think your cover might be blown anyway." Victor glanced around the restaurant, his training automatically assessing the situation. "Perhaps we should discuss this elsewhere." They met that evening at a small cafe far from Romano's. Victor arrived first, positioning himself at a table where he could see all entrances, old habits that would never fade. When Amanda joined him, he looked older than his 60 years, tired in a way that had nothing to do with restaurant shifts. "You should not have done that," he said quietly. "Those men were treating you like garbage. You're a decorated officer, a war hero." Victor shook his head. "I am a man without a country, Dr. Chen. Soviet Union is gone. CIA no longer needs my services. I have no family, no pension, no official existence. Viktor Kozlov, the operative, is dead. The waiter is who I am now. But why let them humiliate you? You could work for any private security firm, any defense contractor. Your experience is invaluable." "Because," Victor said, stirring his coffee with the same precision he brought to everything else, "when you have spent 30 years in shadows, in lies, in violence, sometimes you want to do something simple, something honest. I serve food to people. I make their evening a little better. It is not complicated work, but it is real work." Amanda leaned forward. "But the way they treated you is their shame, not mine. I know who I am, Dr. Chen. I know what I have done, what I have sacrificed, what I have survived. Their ignorance cannot change that. Their disrespect cannot diminish that." Victor looked out the window at the evening traffic, at ordinary people living ordinary lives that he'd spent decades protecting. "In my old life, I was feared. People knew my reputation and they respected it out of necessity. Here, as a waiter, the respect I receive is genuine. The regulars who are kind to me, who ask about my day, who treat me like a human being, they do it because they choose to, not because they are afraid. And the ones who don't," Victor smiled slightly, the first real smile Amanda had seen from him, "they teach me patience. They remind me that dignity comes from within, not from how others see you. And sometimes, Dr. Chen, they reveal who they really are." Word of what happened at Table 12 spread through Romano's like wildfire, but not in the way Amanda had expected. The story wasn't about Victor being a former spy. That detail got lost in translation. Instead, it became about wealthy customers being exposed for their cruelty by someone who'd called them out publicly. Several staff members had overheard enough to know that Victor wasn't just a waiter, that he had some kind of important background, but the specifics remained vague. What mattered was that someone had finally stood up for him, and that the bullies from Table 12 had been humiliated in front of the entire restaurant. The investment bankers never came back to Romano's. Jason Wellington, in particular, seemed to have developed a sudden preference for takeout and home cooking. The other staff treated Victor with new respect, not because they knew exactly what he'd done in his previous life, but because they'd seen how he'd handled years of abuse with dignity. The restaurant's clientele began to change too. Word got out that Romano's was a place where staff were treated with respect, where customers who couldn't behave properly weren't welcome. It attracted a different kind of diner, people who valued good service and treated servers like human beings. Victor's tips improved dramatically, not just because of the absence of fake bills, but because customers began to appreciate his professionalism, his attention to detail, the quiet competence he brought to every interaction. He never mentioned his background, never traded on his former reputation, but somehow his presence elevated the entire dining experience. 3 months after the confrontation, Victor had settled into a routine that felt more sustainable than anything he'd experienced in years. The daily humiliation was gone, replaced by the kind of professional respect he'd forgotten he missed. He still preferred to work quietly, still avoided being the center of attention, but the constant stress of abuse had lifted. Amanda became a regular customer, not to check on him, but because she genuinely enjoyed the atmosphere of Romano's and Victor's service. They'd developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than yourself. One evening, as Victor was clearing Amanda's table, she mentioned something that made him pause. "There's a young man who comes in here sometimes," she said quietly. "Table 8, usually alone, orders the same thing every time. I think he's military, probably intelligence, but he looks lost, like he's trying to figure out what comes next." Victor glanced toward Table 8, where a man in his early 30s sat staring at his untouched dinner. The signs were subtle but unmistakable: the haircut, the posture, the way his eyes tracked movement around the room. But more than that, there was something hollow in his expression that Victor recognized. "He has the look of someone whose war has ended, but who hasn't found peace," Victor observed. "I was thinking maybe you could talk to him, not about specifics, just someone who understands what it's like to transition." Victor considered this. In his old life, he'd been a weapon pointed at targets by people who made decisions he never questioned. As a waiter, he'd found a different kind of purpose, small acts of service that made people's days better. But perhaps there was room for something in between. That night, Victor approached Table 8 with more than just a coffee refill. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "I could not help but notice you seem thoughtful tonight. Perhaps you would like to talk." The young man looked up, and Victor saw recognition in his eyes, not of his face, but of his type. "Your military?" "Was," Victor replied simply. "Long time ago, different country, but some things, they translate." They talked for an hour after the restaurant closed, two men from different generations and different conflicts finding common ground in their shared experience of trying to figure out how to live when the mission was over. Over the following months, Victor found himself becoming something he'd never planned to be: a mentor. The young man from Table 8, whose name was Marcus, had been CIA for 8 years before burning out on a particularly brutal assignment. He'd taken a job in corporate security but felt disconnected from any sense of purpose. Through quiet conversations during late-night shifts, Victor helped Marcus understand that service didn't end just because the uniform came off. That finding meaning in civilian life wasn't about recreating the intensity of operations, but about discovering new ways to protect and serve. Marcus began bringing others, former military, retired intelligence officers, people who'd served their country in various capacities, and were struggling with the transition to civilian life. Romano's became an unofficial gathering place for a community that didn't advertise itself, but understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. Victor never positioned himself as a leader or counselor. He remained simply the waiter who happened to have perspective on certain subjects. But his influence was unmistakable. People who felt lost found direction. People who felt worthless found purpose. People who felt alone found community. The restaurant's management noticed that their evening crowd had developed an unusual demographic, a lot of well-dressed, well-behaved customers who tipped generously and never caused problems. They had no idea they were hosting informal meetings of some of the most experienced intelligence and military professionals in the city. A year after the confrontation at Table 12, Victor received an unexpected visitor. A man in his 50s, well-dressed but not flashy, approached his station during a quiet Tuesday evening shift. "Colonel Kozlov," the man said quietly. "My name is Director Harrison. I believe we should talk." Victor recognized the bearing immediately. Current intelligence, probably CIA, definitely senior level. His first instinct was the old wariness, the automatic assumption that when former handlers made contact, it meant complications. "I am just a waiter now, Mr. Harrison." "Director Harrison," the man corrected gently, "and I'm not here to reactivate you.
I'm here because of what you've been doing here. Victor's expression remained neutral, but Harrison saw the slight tension that indicated full attention. We've been watching the community that's developed around this place. Not surveillance, Harrison added quickly, just awareness. Do you know what you've accomplished here? I serve food and coffee. You've created one of the most effective veteran transition support networks we've ever seen. Completely organic, totally voluntary, and more successful than any official program we've tried to implement. Harrison leaned forward slightly. The people who come here, who talk to you, who find direction through these conversations, they're going back into the world more stable, more purposeful, more effective in their civilian roles. The ripple effects are significant. Victor considered this. And you want to what? Formalize it. Make it official. God no. The moment we try to bureaucratize this, it dies. We want to support it. Quietly. Make sure this place stays in business. Make sure you can continue doing what you're doing. Which is, serving, Harrison said simply, just differently than you used to. 2 years later, Romano's had become something unique in the city's dining scene. Still upscale, still exclusive, but with a reputation for something beyond just good food.
It was known as a place where service meant something, where dignity was respected, where people from different backgrounds could find common ground. Victor still worked his shifts with the same quiet professionalism he'd always shown, but his role had evolved beyond just waiting tables. He'd become a bridge between worlds, helping former operatives find their way in civilian life, connecting people who shared experiences they couldn't discuss with anyone else, and creating a space where service took many different forms. The fake tips and cruel jokes were a distant memory. The wealthy clientele who frequented Romano's now understood that exceptional service was provided by exceptional people, and that treating staff with dignity wasn't just good manners, it was smart business. Amanda still came in regularly, now bringing colleagues and clients who appreciated the restaurant's unique atmosphere. She'd never revealed the full extent of Victor's background to anyone else, understanding that his anonymity was part of what made his current mission possible. Marcus had moved on to a new job with a defense contractor, but he still stopped by Romano's every few weeks. He'd found his purpose in training corporate security teams, and he credited Victor with helping him understand that his skills had value in the civilian world. The network of former intelligence and military personnel who'd found community at Romano's had grown organically. Some moved away, some stayed local, but all carried with them the understanding that service continued in different forms, and that dignity and respect were earned through character, not job titles. Victor Kozlov still works at Romano's, still serves wealthy customers their expensive meals with the same professionalism he's always shown. But now that service is appreciated rather than mocked, respected rather than ridiculed, he never talks about his years as Colonel Kozlov, never trades on his former reputation, never seeks recognition for the missions that shaped history in ways the public will never know. But his influence is evident in every interaction, every conversation, every moment when he helps someone understand that their value isn't determined by their current job title. The wealthy customers who once might have treated him poorly now find themselves in the presence of someone whose quiet dignity demands respect. They may not know his history, but they sense his depth, his experience, his unshakable sense of self. Late at night, after the last customer has left and the kitchen has closed, Victor sometimes sits alone at the bar with a cup of coffee and reflects on the strange turns life can take. From Soviet Spetsnaz to CIA operative to waiter, each role had required different skills, different sacrifices, different forms of service. But the mission had always been the same: protect those who couldn't protect themselves, serve something larger than yourself, and maintain your dignity regardless of how others chose to see you. The bankers who used to mock him learned too late that true strength isn't about how you treat those who can fight back, it's about how you treat those who choose not to. Victor Kozlov could have ended their cruelty at any moment, but he chose patience. He chose dignity. He chose to let them reveal who they really were while he quietly continued being who he'd always been. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Victor Kozlov, someone whose current job didn't reflect their true capabilities, their past achievements, their hidden depths? Someone who endured disrespect with dignity because they knew their worth wasn't determined by others' ignorance? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the waiter, the clerk, the service worker who turned out to be someone extraordinary, because here at Stories of Secret Heroes, we know that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they carry trays and clean tables and do honest work that deserves respect, simply because it's honest work. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with others. Help us honor the quiet strength of those who serve in whatever capacity they can, and remind the world that dignity is earned through character, not job titles. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember to treat everyone with respect, because you never know who you might be talking to. The waiter serving your coffee might once have served his country in ways you can't imagine, and the way you treat him says everything about who you are and nothing about who he is.